Before we get started with today's show, I'm here to tell you about Brez Coffee Company, made by gamers for gamers right here on the Gulf Coast in Pensacola, Florida. Do you like light or medium roast? Then try the Necro Medium, Holy Grail Light, or Stamina Boost. Or if you're like me and prefer darker roast, try the Critical Dark or the Coup Slayer Mocha Roast. But what if you can't pick just one? Then try one of their specialty sample packs, perfect for an all-night gaming, or in the case of my fellow filmmakers, an all-night editing session. Forget about all the crappy coffee you've been buying at the grocery store and head on over to brezcoffeeco.com. Use the promo code DDE at checkout to get 10% off your order. Have you ever thought to yourself after listening to this podcast, why didn't Derek ask this question? Or why didn't he ask that question? I know I certainly have. Well, you get the chance to do that if you sign up for my Patreon at patreon.com/DDiamondPodcast. You get the chance to ask guests of the show a question. If you're a fan of the top 5 list, you get the chance to vote on what the topic will be. You also get early access to episodes, accessibility to my film scripts, and so much more. And you can do so by heading over to patreon.com/DDiamondPodcast. And we want to thank our patrons, Tim Spivey, Donna Diamond, and Shannon Williams. Thanks so much for your continued contributions, and now, on with the show. Welcome to the Derek Diamond Experience podcast, where every week I take a look inside the world of film and television with those who have lived it and experienced it. I am your host, Derek Diamond. And coming up a little bit later on in the show, you'll be hearing my conversation with documentary filmmaker Christopher McDonell. He's here to talk about his documentary Queen of the Beach, which he filmed over a multi-year span and has one of the craziest and most eye-opening stories that I've ever seen unfold in just a film in general, not so much just documentary. But that's what's so fascinating to me about documentary filmmaking is the realism and the rawness that you feel, that you get to an extent with narrative film, but you feel it so much more in documentaries. But we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the show. I've got to talk about the new trailers that dropped. First being the Matrix Resurrections, which I was kind of kicking myself and laughing at myself last Thursday when the trailer dropped, because I had already put out last week's episode. I know I went over the footage that was shown at CinemaCon and talked about how excited I was to see some form of it. I didn't expect it to be pretty much the same thing that was shown at CinemaCon, but either way, I was stoked to see that, like a teaser was dropped on Tuesday after I had recorded everything for the show. Then Thursday, the trailer was released, and I've watched it 4 or 5 times since it came out, and I'm so excited for this movie. And I think I dabbled into this a little bit on last week's show, but I was 12, 13 years old when the first Matrix came out in 99. And I remember just being blown away by the story, the special effects, which, as I talked about, influence film still to this day. A lot of what you see in modern filmmaking when it comes to visual effects originated from The Matrix. I loved the characters, the setting. It was just such a cool movie, and even the sequels, while I don't think they're as good as the original, they still have their moments. And I'm excited to go back, because I want to go back and watch the first 3 before this new one comes out. But the trailer, after being blown away from it, I started watching it again as more of from an analytical point. And it definitely raises a lot of questions. One, and spoilers for those who haven't seen the original trilogy, but how is Neo and Trinity alive? What happened with Morpheus? Why is he different? Because, the actor who is playing the new version of Morpheus, Yahya Abdul-Mateen II, has come out and said that he is playing Morpheus. Now, I don't know if this is a younger version, if it's a different iteration. My theory, and I'm curious as to how this is going to play out on screen, I personally think that Neo has been plugged back into the Matrix, but Trinity, who we also see in the trailer, I think her and Morpheus are computer programs that are designed to look like the two of them. Now, for what purpose Neo has been resurrected, I don't know. But it's interesting because you can go through and watch the trailer, him speaking with the therapist, saying that he's having these dreams that don't really feel like dreams. What does that all mean? And then you see him taking the blue pills, which if you remember from the original movie, you take the red pill, then you exit the Matrix. If you take the blue pill, then you stay in Wonderland, as Morpheus said. He's taking these blue pills, and I think they're prescribed to him by those who are running the Matrix so that he forgets who he actually is. Because we see him relearning his abilities throughout the trailer. So I'm very curious to see what happens. It borrows a lot of elements from the original film, and a lot of people have been critical of that. But I'm just excited to watch it. I'm excited to go back into that universe. And I do believe that it is a sequel and not a reboot, if you will, because and watching other YouTube videos and really watching the trailer, you can see elements that took place in the sequels that carry over into this new one. So I foresee there being like a passing of the torch in some way to a character that we haven't seen yet. Who knows what's going to happen? I do believe that there will be more Matrix films after this. If we'll see Keanu Reeves and Carrie-Anne Moss beyond this film, I don't know. I would certainly like to. But let's just see what happens. I'm just along for the ride when it comes to the new Matrix movie. Like I said, I'm excited to go back into that universe. It'll be fun. It comes out, I believe, December 22nd. Yes, December 22nd is when it comes out in theaters as well as HBO Max. I definitely want to see it in a theater. I never saw the original in theaters. I did see the sequels, both, in the movie theater when they came out in 2003. So this will be a fun day at the movies. And I love that, especially over the last few years, it seems like more big releases are coming out in December. You know, the summer's great and everything. I know it hasn't been the last couple of years due to COVID, but I look forward to December movie going because the year's kind of winding down. Work for me is it's our most relaxed period of the entire year. So get to take, some time off, go to the movies, hang out at home. We'll see what happens. I would say for those who are being overly critical of this movie, just watch it and go along for the ride. If it sucks, it sucks, but I don't think it will. I think it's going to be... I don't foresee it being as good as the original Matrix, but I think it will be better than Reloaded and Revolutions, or at least I hope so. We'll see what happens. But the other trailer that I wanted to talk about dropped very, very recently, and that would be for the Hawkeye series that will be premiering November 24th on Disney+. And I will say this, I have loved the Marvel shows, and I know I've talked a lot about Marvel, especially the last couple of months on the show with Shang-Chi, Loki, even going back to, a little bit of Falcon and Winter Soldier. But this one... I like the Hawkeye character. I think he's actually a little underrated. I enjoyed seeing him take on a more prevalent role in especially Endgame. And I think it's cool that he's getting his own series. It seems like his past being Ronin is catching up to him. And it doesn't go too much into detail as to what the series is about other than that. And it takes place during Christmas time, so it'll be fun to argue, is Hawkeye a Christmas series? Because, the whole, is Die Hard a Christmas movie debate should be... I know that's coming on the internet, and I'm just going to sit back and watch. Because one of my favorite things to do is to just watch people get triggered on the internet. It's hilarious to me. But I'm looking forward to it. The Marvel shows haven't disappointed me yet. I like some more so than others, but obviously I'm going to watch it. I think it will be good. Will it be great? I don't know. It's tough to tell based off of one trailer, but I'm excited for it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Anything Marvel, my fiance and I enjoy it very much, so it'll definitely be a day one watch for us when Hawkeye comes out. So fun stuff to look forward to around the holidays. As I mentioned before, I love the holiday releases because year's winding down and everything, but I won't get into that again. But coming up next on the show is my conversation with documentary filmmaker Christopher McDonell. And I love chatting with documentary filmmakers because there are some similarities, but there are also major differences when it comes to documentary filmmaking. And I love picking their brains about why do they feel so passionate about this topic? How did they come across the topic? What led them to what became the story? And this was no exception and was one of the more fascinating documentaries that I've heard about. And I'm talking about Queen of the Beach, which I had the pleasure of watching. I thought it was a very good documentary. I think it told a very powerful story. And I won't dive too much into spoilers, one, because I think everybody should watch it. And Christopher can explain it so much better than I can. So hopefully you all enjoy hearing this conversation as much as I had being a part of it. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Christopher McDonell. Welcome back to the Derek Diamond Experience podcast, and this week I'm joined by filmmaker Christopher McDonell. Christopher, how are you, sir?
Hey, I'm pretty good. Thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Excited to talk with you about your documentary that we'll get to here in just a bit. And you were telling me, so you're based out of Vancouver, and I don't get to actually speak with many filmmakers who live in Canada, but I know Vancouver is a very popular destination for filmmakers as far as filming projects, like a lot of CW shows like Arrow, Flash. I think Superman and Lois is filmed there as well. So are you a lifelong resident of Canada?
Lifelong resident of Canada. Actually grew up in Ontario, small town of Aurelia. I was just telling you, now that I know that you're broadcasting from Florida, that our family spent a lot of spring breaks in Florida year after year doing the snowbird thing. And then I moved out to Vancouver to go to UBC and ended up staying and very quickly kind of switching to the Vancouver Film School and jumping into the film scene pretty early, actually.
What was it that specifically made you want to get into filmmaking?
So I'm one of those guys who knew early on what I wanted to do in life. Doesn't mean that I've always been able to achieve that, but I knew, when I was 16, and this is back in the 80s, I bought a video camera when no one had video cameras. If you remember, to put this in context, Back to the Future had just come out with Michael J. Fox's character, and he has the camcorder in the movie, and I don't know, maybe that put it in my head. But I bought a camcorder, started filming some comedy sketches. And when I was 17, I pitched a show to the cable network in my small town of Aurelia, Ontario. And they ended up broadcasting my show. We did 9 episodes. It was called Solo Shy. So at 17 years old, I was already running a show.
That's insane. So you had pretty early access to what goes on behind the scenes to make film and television happen. That's usually the way it works out, is that someone goes to school and then they go into the workforce. So it was kind of the opposite for you.
I threw myself in and learned self-taught, really. I was editing with 2 VCRs, just connected to each other and just using the pause and play buttons. Like, it's pretty crazy what I was doing back then. And then moved to Vancouver. When I enrolled in the Vancouver Film School, that's when I got, more of a professional training of how to do things. But I actually went from there. I started working as an extra in the film industry. That put me on set because, as you said, there's a lot of production work that happens here. And so that put me on set. Now I'm seeing, the pros do their thing and a full crew and learning the hierarchy of how that works. And landed my first gig working as a production assistant on the X-Files.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The X-Files was shot in Vancouver.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to jump onto season 2 the year that they won the Golden Globe for best TV drama. So it's kind of in the heyday of that show, which really elevated the stature of filming in Vancouver itself. And being on the show, that was the biggest education probably that I was able to get.
I can imagine so, because, I remember growing up, the X-Files being like one of those shows that you had to watch because it was something that people would talk about all the time. The day after the show would air, whether you were at school or you were at work, people were talking about it. So it almost like forced you to see it. That way you could even be a part of casual conversation. I can imagine, being almost like a sponge for learning how a set works and what goes into making a show happen. I can't imagine a much better environment for that time.
Yeah, it was fantastic. It was, and filming hours back then were crazy. So I'd be working 18-hour days. But like you said, it was one of those shows that was really hot at the time. And so we would have crowds of people, usually kids, that would come to the locations everywhere we were filming. And so my job as a PA, part of my job was to try to, keep the audience at bay when the stars were out and help kind of accommodate the autograph signing or things like that. So that was fun.
And I think, and I've heard other filmmakers say this as well, being a PA on a set, and I can imagine being a PA on a set of that magnitude, you can't help but pick up things, like watching others work and how they operate things, whether it's the actors, the director of photography, really any job. I can imagine, like that just being such a great environment to learn. And I preach that to anybody who wants to work in film, but as I said before, I can't imagine a much better environment and a much better set to be on than a show of that magnitude.
Yeah, I think it was helpful that I did film school, which taught me the basics and where we did hands-on with, we were editing with a Steenbeck at the time, which is like a 16 millimeter, film editor, cutting negatives, learning how to be a first AD on set, learning all these tools, and then to be actually immersed in the set life and see others who had been doing that for 20 years, where that was their career, basically performing, just elevated that level of education. And then taking that, to my own projects, and I guess adapting as a director from those skill sets that I had picked up and whatever I had learned along the way. Yeah, it's a pretty good strategy.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. So once your time working on the X-Files ended, where did you go from there? Did you start to do your own projects after your time with the X-Files was over?
So I never stopped making films, even while I was in film school or working on set. And so I was making short films, and I had written a feature film that placed in a national competition in Canada. I was trying to raise financing for that. As part of my plan, I wanted to shoot a short film as kind of a promo film or a trailer, and use that to help raise the financing for the feature. And so I tapped into the X-Files crew. I ended up having over 150 volunteers work on this project that I did. It was a 4-day shoot, 35 millimeter, so expensive equipment. And I had the camera operator from the X-Files DP this for me.
Oh, wow.
Various other people, the sound mixer. So I would, because of the connections that I had working on the show, and people who work in the industry know you become like a family. You're a film family. So yeah, I was able to benefit from that. And so we shot a really nice 10-minute piece, which ended up helping me raise the financing for my first feature film that I would shoot several years later.
That's amazing in the sense that, one, you were able to get that amount of people in general, but the fact that you made these connections from a show like the X-Files, I can imagine that had to be a really heartwarming and gratifying feeling when everyone volunteered and said, yeah, I would love to help you out with this.
Yeah, it was pretty great. And in addition to, one of the executive producers, I think he's passed away now, he let me use his editing studio. And then we were also given what they call short ends of the film. So when you shoot on film, I think you get about 4 minutes per reel. They don't always use the 4 minutes, right? So sometimes there's 30 seconds left over, and that's called a short end. And so they'll wrap that up, put them in little cans, and they're usually discarded. But we were given those short ends. We shot our entire film that way. Yeah, it was crazy. So just lots of resources that I was able to tap into. And by working on that show and other shows, that really helped me launch my own career.
Absolutely. A part of me wishes that I had been into film, and part of it is because of my age, but I do respect those who worked with film. Everything's digital now, and it's so much easier to just, take an SD card or whatever type of card you're using, plug it into a computer, and you get the footage from there.
Yeah.
I've worked with film a little bit in a photography class, like with developing film, like the way they used to do, back in the, the old newspaper type era. So I respect so much what filmmakers of that era did, because you look at the 80s and 90s and you look at, some of the most iconic films and TV that's ever been made. From, you mentioned the X-Files, you also mentioned Back to the Future. So many great pieces of art that will live on long after all of us are gone, all shot on film. And I think that's amazing.
The difficulties as well, when you're shooting on film, like back in the day, the director's not even watching the live take as it happens. We take these things for granted. Nowadays, you have like the big iPad or whatever, so everything is watched in real time. But like old school filmmaking, the director relied on the cinematographer. And even when I shot my own film, I'd be standing beside my DP. He's the eyes of watching the frame, and I'm standing beside him watching the actors. So it's a very collaborative process that has really changed. And I'm sure, for the better in so many ways.
Yeah, for sure. And it makes you really appreciate the technology we have now, for sure.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about your award-winning documentary, Queen of the Beach, which you directed. What inspired you to want to tackle a documentary and this subject specifically? And how did the process go from the idea to ultimately how it was made?
So this is one of those projects that could only be made with the technology that we have today. I was one man with the camera, basically flying to India and finding my subject matter and, doing everything, from arranging, the flights and the hotels, to coordinating the locations, to having waivers signed. and interviewing the people who are in the film while I'm filming and trying to direct at the same time. And then and managing, the audio. I'm reading the levels of that as well. Now, why did I shoot this film? So back in the mid 90s, I shot a documentary in West Africa. So I had done a documentary that was a 60-minute film that played in some festivals. And I had a taste of the developing world. I knew that I loved to travel. I knew that there's a lot of complications when you travel and you're trying to make a film. The film I shot in West Africa, for example, I actually had malaria while I was working on it. So I was out for the count for about a week. But this particular film, I had been invited by a small team of people from my church to go to India and film what they were doing. And they were paying me a little bit to do that. And so I thought, if I'm going to be in India, I'm going to, let's shoot a documentary as well. I didn't know what to shoot. I didn't have a lot of knowledge about India, and I wrestled with trying to come up with a topic for probably like a month. When I was in India, my first day, I even went out with the camera in Mumbai, and I found these kids playing cricket. Who, they immediately stop. Everyone comes rushing towards me because, I kind of stand out. I'm a white guy. I've got a camera on my shoulder. And so we had some small talk. And then I asked them, I said to them, I'm here to shoot a documentary. What topic should I do a film on? And they threw out some ideas. And then all together, they all started saying child labor. Like it's the one thing they really wanted. You're a Canadian, take the message back. We have a problem with child labor. So even though they said that, I must have ignored it. I stumbled upon Westerners who were in India for spiritual pilgrimages. And I started seeing that this was actually a big thing. Whether it was school groups who were there for a month-long Yogananda kind of retreat. There was an American group doing that, or there were two Canadians in the holy city of Varanasi, exploring yoga and Reiki and talking to the holy Babas every day. So I started filming a story about Westerners on spiritual journeys while I was shooting the other project for 28 days, zigzagging around the country doing this, 8 airplanes. I say planes, trains, and auto rickshaws. And at the end of it, I was so burnt out that I decided, I'm going to go to Goa and lay on a beach and take 2 days for myself just as a vacation. And that was the whole plan. I didn't know much about Goa. I went through my Lonely Planet and found what looked like the most lively beach, Anjuna Beach. Went to Goa, thinking I was done filming, left the camera in the hotel. And when I hit the beach, I was just blown away with what I saw, because this was unlike anything that I'd seen in India so far, mostly because of the foreigners. It was just a sea of scantily clad white foreigners being served by the locals. Cows roaming about freely, hippies, with long hair, and the men wearing these thong type European outfits, trance music, alcohol and drugs on open display. And but the thing that grabbed me the most, literally, I think I say that in the film, it was the child vendors. Like as soon as I hit the beach, it was these young kids, mostly young girls, grabbing my arm, trying to lead me to their shops to buy their clothes or jewelry or their trinkets. And I was really struck by that, and by the intelligence and the business savvy of these girls who were, it's the one that I ended up making the movie about. She's 9 years old. And so she was one of the 3 girls that led me to her shop. I knew my vacation was over. I arranged with them. I said, tomorrow, can I bring my camera back and just, sit in the shadows and film you guys for the day? And they said, no problem. So I did that. I brought my camera the next day, and it was mostly jokes and laughs. This young girl breaking out into spontaneous song, starting to shine above the rest as being really charismatic and energetic. And then I sat down and I started asking them some hard questions. And I asked this girl, Shilpa, who was using her English name Sonia at the time, whether she had any dreams in life. What do you want to do when you get older? And she told me that she wanted to go to school. There were some things that led up to her finally opening up, but she opened up, and with her tears, with her eyes welling up, she said, I want to go to school. That's my dream. And I asked her if she had friends that go to school. And she's, yeah, I see them every day. And I asked her how long she's been working on the beach. And she said since she was 5 years old. And then I learned that she's the sole provider for her family. There's 6 of them. And she's the one on the beach every day bringing home the money. And that really, made a connection and touched me. But a day later, I was back on a plane to Canada. So I didn't know what to do with that. I came home thinking I'd shot this one film, but the story that resonated the most with me was of this young girl and her life. And so I ended up having an opportunity to return the following year, went back to Goa, not knowing if they'd still be there. And as soon as I hit the beach, Chris, these girls, they all came running to me. They remembered me fondly. Shilpa then introduced me to her mom and brought me to her home. And, I met the family, and I basically continued filming, and the story evolved from there. And so
that's so fascinating.
Yeah. So this story that began by happenstance begins when Shilpa is 9, finishes when she's 21. I ended up 11 years in her life and over the course of 5 trips.
I was about to ask how frequently you went back to find out more about her story.
Yeah. So I went back. So she was 9. And then when I went back, she was 11. 3rd trip, she was 12. Then there's a break where we actually lost contact. I left a phone with her, and 6 months after returning to Canada, it went dead. And I was trying to reach out to every other number that I had, but basically we lost contact. And then 5 years later, I hopped on a plane and went back. And this is kind of a pivotal point in the film. So I don't know how much I want to say, but I basically found her. It was a surprise. And the 2 of us continued the journey from there. And much of the film then plays out when she's 17 years old.
Wow. When you asked if you could film them initially, were you surprised that they were so open to it?
At this point, I wasn't. If I were beginning the project, I would say yes, but actually there was hardly any resistance in India. People love the camera, and they also love pointing the camera at me. Like, there were many times, this is what's funny, like I was able to film people quite openly. They'd be natural. There was very little resistance from people, and especially these girls. But I had occasions as well where I'd be on the airplane and the guy beside me would pull out his phone, and then this literally happened. He leaned into my shoulder and took a selfie of the 2 of us. He didn't, introduce himself to me or anything. It's just, I don't know. There was a time I was running on the beach. I was out jogging on this beach, and these 3 guys started running alongside me and filming me. And they were laughing and joking. Maybe it was funny to see me running. But yeah, so it's very reciprocal there.
That's so fascinating in the sense that, when you go to a completely different culture, you don't know how they're going to react. If you say, oh, can I bring my camera and essentially film you doing your job?
Yeah.
You just don't know. So that's crazy that not just her specifically, but it seemed like the entire culture really welcomed you with open arms. That's awesome.
Yeah, they did. I mean, I go back to her village several times, but it's during our 3rd trip. And it's the same thing. I was able to walk around with the camera, and people are very receptive. Sometimes, the problem is that they pose. That is the problem. that you get people looking at the camera and smiling or waving or something when you're trying to capture something natural.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as me filming Shilpa and her friends, I knew that they had to work. And I learned early on that they had a quota of what they had, how much money they had to make for their season, and that there were repercussions if they didn't make that. So I was basically buying their time early on. I cut a deal with them so that they knew that, if they spend time with me and they're losing business as a result, I'm going to compensate for that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's how we started. Really, once we became closer, and midway, Shilpa started calling me her brother. She's my sister. So, things changed after that. But in the early days, we had to have that understanding.
Right. When you initially found out her story and the fact that she was providing for her whole family from an early age, what kind of emotional impact did that have on you?
Yeah, it's just so surprising, right? I mean, when you and I think back, like you think back when you're 9 years old, can you imagine that you're the one responsible for paying for the house rent and
No.
and put food on the table? Yeah, it's pretty crazy. And in her family, she has three older sisters, and two of them were married off. And so what happens? I should talk a little bit about how girls are basically treated in her culture and much of India, but of course not all of India. But much of India and much of her culture, it's very much a man's world. And so in her world, the boys get the privileges. And she had an older brother. He went to school, and he went to school because she was paying for him to go to school. When she was 12 years old and he was 14, she was paying for him to go to school, even though this was her childhood dream, right? But he's a boy. And so largely the girls in her culture are born and put out to work as soon as they can talk. So Shilpa was begging at a mosque when she was 4 years old. And then she was working on the beach when she was 5. The girls will work all day, come home, do the cooking, do the cleaning, and then go back, to work the very next day. And the boys, her father was an alcoholic, and I knew him during this time. And every time I saw him, he would be in a bit of a stupor. I learned that Shilpa actually gave him a daily allowance so that he could buy his booze.
Wow.
And yeah, so you learn these things, and then you learn the conditions of the work as well. And this is, the story of child labor, that there's actually a network of adults all profiting from the children who are working on the beach and in any type of child labor, presumably. But in Shilpa's case, she had the boss man, who is very mysterious. I was never able to meet him. He never showed his face, but he's the guy she owed a monthly quota to. And she basically would work on the beach for 6 months during the tourist season and be expected to make so much money. And she told me, other girls told me as well, if they don't make their quota, the boss will beat them. So what they end up doing is borrowing money from loan sharks to try to, pay for, because the clothes and the jewelry that they have, it's all on rent. So they borrow this money. And I said, well, what happens if you can't pay back the man you borrowed from? Oh, he'll set fire to shop. So this is what they're dealing with. And then, you think, I don't want to say too much about the police, but allegedly, the girls were all telling me they're collecting handouts every week as well. And then you have the shop owners and all these people that are profiting from a system that works, and it works because people like me come in and we feel pity for these young girls. So we end up buying things that we don't want or don't need. And so At one point, early on, I decided to try to help her to go to school. And that's what much of the story evolves into. It's the difficulty and the obstacles that I uncover trying to help this young girl get off the beach and get into a classroom and fulfill her own dream. And so I went to an NGO, and there's many in India who are dedicated, like non-government organizations, dedicated to helping children that are impoverished go to school. And so I tried to involve them. And so, the facts in the film, like what I learn and what we see, it's coming from the people on the ground. So you don't have to just take my word for it. It's, this is a problem, and it's recognized throughout the country. And there are many people trying to change that paradigm, to end child labor and to ensure that children like Shilpa get an education and are able to achieve their full potential.
And props to you for taking someone who was, at the time when you guys met was a complete stranger, lives on the other side of the world, and you helping really is inspiring to me, and hopefully to anyone else who is listening, because it's what you have to do. If you help, you pay it forward and things like that. So that's great to hear. Do you still keep in contact with her despite the fact that the documentary's done?
Yeah, so actually, so we're in touch all the time with her family. I'm very close with everyone in her family. When I'm there, I call her Mom Amma, which is the Hindi word for mom. And her sisters, they're all my sisters. India, I love India. It's like when I walk the streets in India, the kids will call me uncle. You as well. If you walk the streets there, they're going to call you uncle. And the men will call you brother automatically. I mean, men and women, you're going to be brother to everyone. Everyone is a brother. Everyone is a sister. Now, with your question, so I did 5 trips in the course of the filming, finished the film, submitted it to some festivals. It was received in several festivals in India. And I was fortunate enough that there were 4 festivals playing within a 3-week span in January of 2020. So I went back to India in January of 2020, just before the pandemic shut down the world, right? And at this point, actually, I left out a detail. Well, Shilpa, she's now married. So my 5th trip was to attend her wedding. And the 6th trip, when I arrived, she was pregnant. So now, yeah, so I was able to spend some quality time with her and her husband while she was pregnant. I took them to the hospital one day for, just a checkup. So yeah, we're very close, and we've had some good quality time during the making of the film and beyond as well.
That's fantastic, and that's such an inspiring story. I did want to ask you also, as we start to wrap up here, is Queen of the Beach available for anyone who wants to see it? Is it available to watch online?
Yeah, so Queen of the Beach is available in most English-speaking countries right now. It's coming to French-speaking countries in the middle of September, and it's playing on Apple TV, Amazon Prime, Google Play. Those are the big platforms. There's other platforms. It's on Microsoft, Rakuten. But yeah, that's where it's at right now. We're trying. So it's in the US, it's in Canada, it's in the UK. And I have a list. It's pretty amazing to know. I mean, it's playing in Africa, it's playing in Russia. So it's pretty amazing to know the reach that we have. But we don't have distribution secured yet for India. And I get a lot of messages daily, where can we watch this? When is it coming to India? So that's something we are working on.
Fantastic. And last thing I want to ask you before we get out of here, what is one piece of advice that you could give to an aspiring filmmaker?
So yeah, I've been asked this a few times. I would just say to never give up. I'm sure they hear that all the time, but the problem is when you're making a film, if like I self-financed this and I shot this over a number of years, you'll have your supporters, but you'll also have a lot of naysayers. And I had a lot of people tell me how crazy I was. When I decided to go back on my 5th trip, having had no contact with Shilpa in 5 years, even my dad thought I was nuts. What if you don't find her? It's because it's expensive and you have to take time off work to do that. But ultimately, I would just say, if you have a vision and you believe in it, you have to believe in yourself. And hopefully you'll have supporters who can rally behind you. If you don't, they're going to come. But either way, it's believe in yourself. I have a motto on my website: never surrender the dream. And so that's kind of what I live by.
I like that. What is your website, and do you have any social media that you like to plug so the listeners can follow you?
So it's my nickname Cleach, which is Cleetche, which I picked up in high school, incidentally, with a Spanish teacher who mispronounced Chris. And so he would call me Cleach. And then, of course, my friends, jumped on that. And pretty soon I was Cleach. So I have a website, which is cleach.com. On Instagram, I'm Cleach. And on Facebook, we have a Facebook page, which is Cleach. But I think Queen of the Beach will take you there. So if you look up Queen of the Beach on Facebook, that's probably where I'm the most active. And we'll, of course, be posting a link to your show after.
Fantastic. Well, Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me and share your story. This was inspiring and awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I enjoyed being on here.
Thanks again to Christopher McDonell for coming on the show for that wonderful conversation. As I mentioned in the intro, I very much enjoyed watching Queen of the Beach. Be sure to follow the film on Facebook to find out where you can watch it online and find out what Christopher will be up to next. And if you want to follow this show on social media, I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at D Diamond Podcast. If you want to subscribe to the show, I'm on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast for free. Just search for The Derek Diamond Experience. And if you could, please leave a review. The more reviews I get, the more visible I become to the podcasting public. You can also watch video versions of the show on YouTube. Just search for Derek Diamond. I'm also on Patreon at patreon.com/DDiamondPodcast. If you want early access to episodes, vote on show topics, and so much more, just head on over to Patreon for that. And of course, thank you to my close friends, the Unicorn Wranglers, for providing the theme music for the podcast. You can check out all their music on Apple Music, Google Play, and Spotify. That's going to do it for this week's show, so enjoy the rest of your week. Have a safe and fun weekend. Thank you for tuning in to another awesome episode of the Derek Diamond Experience. I am your host, Derek Diamond, and we'll see you guys back here next Thursday.